Big data segment, we're going to look at the challenges implicit in having big data as an organization, in dealing with it. Now, before I go through this, of course, there's really three areas. There's the actual challenges with the data itself. Now, these we've already spoken about. We've spoken about the fact that high volume data gives challenges like you can't store it on one node, or traditional processors can't deal with the volume, etc., etc. I can actually add a few here because we did all of these in the first bit here, first video. Visualization is another one that big data becomes much harder to actually create graphics and visualization for. So we've already spoken about that set, but lest we think that this is the only set of issues and problems, we would of course be mistaken. Now, just to say that these particular ones, the kind of solutions to these we're going to look at later. But there's also process challenges. So this is the challenges that you encounter while you're actually processing the data. So firstly, just to acquire the data, I mean, if you think about what we've spoken about, it's one thing to say there's a ream of interesting information you can glean on your customers, but that there's a literally how do you go about getting that? Now, you know, the economies that lie behind 4IR, like social media companies, have become more and more proficient at reaping and gathering and then selling this information. This is true. But there are still lots of challenges around this. And then how do you store the data? How do you warehouse it? So especially unstructured data, these are all more difficult with that. Traditional data warehousing wasn't designed for unstructured data. Of course, a lot of these solutions have really been worked out quite well, but we continue with grappling with them. How do you data mine and clean the data? So at the end of the day, you've got challenges around, again, especially unstructured data. How do you get into it and how do you clean it? Again, we spoke there about people's identities, for example, and how do we actually start figuring out that Fluffy Slippers 321 is actually Mrs. Yvonne Johnson, who's also Mrs. Yvonne Rees. Data aggregation and integration. How do we put these data sets together then? How do we analyze and monitor them, and how do we interpret them? So the data processing itself does become a big challenge. And then finally, management challenges, and there's lots of those. That leading big data challenges can be very difficult because you very often have to go through a very long period of investment and setting up an organization for big data competencies, and it actually can take a very long time. There's relatively few low-hanging fruits in this domain. Privacy and security are a big challenge. We all know that increasingly with big data, who owns the data, and can you, for example, move it across the world, and all of these questions becomes a very big issue, which brings us then to data governance, same thing. Data information sharing become issues. Who owns the data again? I mean, if you think about data on your wearable watch, who really owns that? Do you own it? Does the watch company own it? Does the fitness company that then gets that data from the watch company by your permission own it? The answer is they all own it, probably, and even some intermediate companies like data aggregators, they probably all own this stuff. How do you pay for big data solutions? That's becoming increasingly easy. I mean, I think a lot of this is now done in the cloud, so a lot of this is becoming easier. But a lot of these topics re-emerge in the AI section and videos and chapter, and there really we also talk to some of the things that you need to set into place, and they are costly. They're not inexpensive. So things like the major big data / AI team. So big data / AI, by the way, this is what we call the data scientist, someone who can combine those two domains. So that brings us to the final one, that you have huge talent management problems. There's massive data science skill shortages. It's a very difficult area to build with huge competencies. So we must think about it and think about the organizational design. how are we going to design this stuff into an organization? Are we going to have centers of excellence that deal with it? Are we going to have distributed competencies around the organization? All of these are big management challenges.